Chapter 9. The next morning, Izuku checks in with a recovery girl before homeroom begins. "You already read half the book?" She blinks in surprise. "I thought it would take longer. It certainly did for me, but you seem like you are a faster reader. I'm still impressed that you, a 15-year-old boy, willingly read human anatomy and physiology 4 times in less than a year. I feel like it took me ages to get through that book when I was in college." Izuku smiles and she turns to her desk, pulling something out of the lower drawer. "Well, then, I have no worries giving you this." She pulls out what looks to be some sort of costume. Izuku tilts his head questioningly as his mentor explains, "You are going to need this for today's hero lesson. I've already spoken with Toshinori-kun and, apparently the class is going to be combat training. Since it's really just a chance for the students to show off how their quirks can be used in battle, you will be on standby for injuries." "Oh. Okay," he says, still confused by the costume. She gives him a firm look. "Now remember that until you learn how to control your quirk, you are not allowed to heal anything beyond minor injuries. However, since you read a good deal of that first aid book last night, you can also choose to treat minor injuries through traditional means." He nods and finally she gestures to the costume in her hands. "You never submitted a form for your costume." "Huh? Costume?" he asks, "but I thought healers often wear costumes too, especially since most work as combat medics," recovery girl explains, "so that they're more easily identifiable on the field. I hope you don't mind, but I went ahead and spoke with your mother to create your costume for you. There are some regulations that combat medic costumes have to follow, but I think we made something rather nice." His breath catches and he wants to reach for his costume exclamation mark, but recovery girl puts it back in her drawer. "You won't need that until after lunch," she says, "but one of the things it comes with are a few pouches full of medical equipment. Today's class will be a good opportunity to become familiar with them." A bit disappointed that he can't become familiar with them now, Izuku pouts and nods. Recovery girl's eyes twinkle with amusement and he blushes, looking down at his feet. "Okay." She smiles before adding, "And, remember what we talked about yesterday?" Izuku ponders. "Oh. I can observe my classmates' quirks more closely today. And think of how overuse would affect them?" Recovery girl nods and the warning bell rings. Izuku bids his goodbyes before joining Kaken, who is waiting outside. Kaken frowns at the skip in his step and asks, "What are you so happy about?" Izuku beams. "I got to see my healer costume," he chirps. "Healer costume?" Kaken raises an eyebrow incredulously. "I know, right?" Izuku says, "I didn't even know I would get one." Apparently recovery girl-san designed it with mom. Uh-oh. Kaken smirks when Izuku gives him a look. They walk into Class 1A and take their seats. Homeroom begins soon after and Izuku's heart still gives a little leap of excitement when he sees Aizawa walk in. He's Aizawa now, not Eraserhead. Man, it's gonna be a while before he stops internally fanboying over his teachers. There's even heroes in the goddamn cafeteria. Izuku nearly chokes on his food when lunch rush passes by his and Kaken's table. At least it's a bit easier with All Might during their hero class after lunch. While everyone freaks out at the sight of the number 1 hero, Izuku is able to remain a little more composed. Sure, he gawks too. It would be suspicious if he didn't, and All Might's Silver Age costume is really cool. But when All Might's smile gets just a bit brighter when their eyes meet, well, Izuku can't help but feel a little bit special. "I teach hero basic training," the hero announces once he reaches the podium. "It is a subject where you train, in different ways to learn the basics of being a hero. You'll take the most units of this subject." Izuku's lip twitches. It sounds like he rehearsed this many times. All Might promptly announces that they'll be doing combat training, which Izuku already knew, but it's fun to see Kaken's enthusiastic reaction. Their costumes slide out of panels in the walls and Izuku is pleasantly surprised when his is there too. Recovery Girl must have given it to All Might during lunch. As they get changed, Izuku takes a moment to admire his costume in one of the changing room mirrors. It appears to be a light green and white jumpsuit with pale yellow bands down the front and a darker red belt that holds his medical bags. Looking at it a bit closer, Izuku realizes with a fond flutter in his heart that it almost looks like a combat-ready, palette-swapped version of what Recovery Girl wears underneath her lab coat. It also has black gloves, elbow and knee pads, as well as a black face mask that he keeps on his neck for now. The most noticeable part, however, is the red caduceus symbol on his chest, which is probably the required healer identification Recovery Girl mentioned. A smile tugs at his lips. He feels so important. Not bad. Izuku glances up to see Kaken giving him an appraising look. "Thanks," he says, "you look pretty cool too." Kaken puffs up his chest as he smirks. Izuku rolls his eyes and playfully shoulders past him, following the rest of his classmates as they start to make their way to ground beta. It takes a moment to realize that the tall suit of armor walking in front of him is actually Ida, but when he does, he trots up to his side. "Your costume is super cool, Ida-kun," Izuku says. Ida's armored face turns to him. "Thank you. Yours is interesting as well." He gets the feeling Ida doesn't quite know what to make of him. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask. They say the clothes make the man, young men and ladies," All Might declares as, interrupting Ida, "be fully aware, from now on you are heroes." Izuku smiles and glances around at his classmates. They all look so cool. All Might just about voices his thoughts, seeming very excited as he gazes at all of their costumes. "Now, it's time for combat training," he announces, somehow straightening up even further. He goes on to explain that, since villains have a higher probability of attacking indoors, their training will take place inside. They'll be split into heroes and villains to fight 2-on-2 battles. The hero's goal is to find and capture the nuclear weapon that the villains are protecting. All throughout his explanation, students ask question after question. Izuku can see All Might's sweat dropping and stifles a laugh, but it gets really hard when the hero just pulls out a script to read from. Teams and opponents will be determined by drawing lots. All Might says, holding up a box. Ida raises his hand. How will teams of 2 be chosen if there is an odd number of students? His classmates shift uncomfortably, recalling how easily Mineta was expelled on just the first day of class. Izuku tilts his head. Well, if he's going to be on the sidelines. "No worries, young Ida," All Might shouts, dramatically pointing to Izuku. "Young Midoriya here will not be participating." Most of the class aside from Kaken, Yaozu, and Todoroki, make various noises of confusion. Has been given a unique opportunity to welcome a young healer into its ranks. Young Midoriya is being mentored by Recovery Girl-san, but he will be joining the hero course in many of its classes. However, during exercises that involve direct combat with quirks, he will remain on the sidelines in case any injuries are obtained. As Izuku shrinks under the sudden attention of his classmates, All Might gives a cheeky smile. "Be grateful, young heroes. Healers are very rare and you are very lucky to have the chance to learn alongside one." Okay, he's really laying it on thick, and from the mirthful look on his face, it's on purpose. Izuku blushes as his classmates practically gawk at him. "A healer? Hey, cool, I've never met a healer before." "Like a doctor?" "No, dummy, he's like Recovery Girl, he has a healing quirk." "Oh. I guess the wings make more sense now," the brown-haired girl says, and Izuku gives her a confused look. "On your costume. The medical symbol? Oh, right. How does your quirk work?" A lanky black-haired boy asks. "You're not going to kiss us like Recovery Girl, right?" All Might lets out a booming laugh, catching all of their attention. "Don't worry, I'm sure you'll become very familiar with this quirk soon enough," he says. "After all, as heroes in training, injuries are to be expected. Avoid it if possible, of course. but nevertheless inevitable. Well, it's a good thing you're here, then. The red-haired boy that was talking to Kakin earlier grins at him. Midoriya-kun, was it? Yeah. He smiles back. Alright, let's get started. All Might says. Lots are drawn, the teams are made, and then Izuku is heading with most of the class to the monitor room. Kakin, Ida, Uraraka, and Ieyasu make their way to their assigned battle building. While the teams take time to make their plan of attack, Izuku opens his medical pouches and examines the contents. It seems like stuff that would be typically found in any first aid kit, but it's pretty extensive. Izuku is surprised that they were able to fit so much into these bags, and in an organized manner. He'll have to be sure to avoid letting it get messy. Seeing so much equipment, however, kind of makes him nervous. He finds himself wishing he had read more of the book last night. Sure, first aid seems simple enough, but what if he panics in the heat of the moment and completely forgets what to do? Of course he could always use his quirk. Recovery Girl even gave him permission to for minor injuries, but wouldn't it look bad for a healer to rely so heavily on their quirk that they don't even know basic first aid? If he ever gets hurt or sick, this is the only way he'd be able to help people. Why didn't he bother learning this stuff sooner? Young Midoriya. All Might's voice cuts through his thoughts. The #1 hero is facing the large screen displaying the battle area, but he glances at the Gurinet in concern. Everything alright? He asks. You're muttering. Izuku waves his hands apologetically. Sorry. It's a bad habit. I'm just, making myself familiar with my medical bags. All Might nods and turns back to the wall of screens. Now, let's start the indoor person-to-person combat training with Team A and Team D. He announces into the microphone. Izuku stands a few feet behind the rest of his classmates as they gather around All Might, gazing up at the screens that display the various angles of the interior of the building. Okay, everyone, All Might says, you all should think as well. The screens don't have any audio, but it's clear that Ida is trying to form a plan with Kakin, who is very obviously ignoring him. Izuku sighs and ponders about the possible outcomes of this exercise. Kakin and Ida might win out of sheer power, but Ieyasu didn't get in through recommendations for nothing. He watches as she whispers to Uraraka, who nods determinedly. As soon as All Might gives the signal, Ieyasu creates a ladder and the two girls climb to the second floor. She also creates 2 pairs of goggles. Then both girls are creeping along the corridor, their eyes concealed behind tinted glass. Why are they wearing goggles? Asks the electric blonde boy. Kaminari was his name? Izuku thinks back to All Might announcing the teams and nods. Yeah. Kaminari. It's probably part of their plan. Another boy Ojiro answers. Kakin does exactly what Izuku expected he would and attacks first, leaving Ida behind to defend the weapon. As soon as he launches himself at the girls, Ieyasu quickly makes a shield and throws something at Kakin with the other hand. All of the sudden, the screens turn white and everyone winces, either squinting or closing their eyes. A flash bomb. All Might laughs, clever. The screens clear just in time for them to see Uraraka slap a disoriented Kakin with her hand. A second later, he starts floating into the air. The blonde shrieks indignantly and aims an explosion at Ieyasu, but the shield protects her. The force of the explosion sends the floating Kakin flying back into the wall. Izuku winces at the hard impact. Uraraka touches her fingers together, causing Kakin, still stunned from being thrown into the wall, to fall to the ground. The girls quickly dash forward and Ieyasu holds down Kakin's head and upper torso with her shield while Uraraka ties his wrists, together with the capture tape in one swift movement. Bukagu Katsuki has been apprehended. All Might announces. Izuku cringes. No way Kakin is going down that easily. All Might sensei. Kakin suddenly lets out a large explosion. The hero team leaps backwards in surprise, but Uraraka, who had just tied his wrists together, doesn't manage to fully escape the explosion. Her face contorts, with pain as she pulls away with a very obvious burn on her arms. Exclamations of shock and outrage ripple through his classmates. What the heck, he just attacked them. Ashido shouts. Bukage-kun, that's cheating. Kirishima frowns. Not manly at all. All Might grips the microphone and says sternly, Young Bukage, I made it very clear that once you are apprehended you are out for the rest of the game. Kaken continues to thrash around, no doubt yelling furiously. He continues to release explosions, causing the hero team to back away from him, clearly confused. Uraraka ducks behind Ieyasu and her shield. Young Bukage. All Might warns. Kaminari wrinkles his nose. Man, what a sore loser. Hey, he got free. Izuku tenses up as Kaken's wrists snap apart, having broken through the capture tape with his explosions. His face is twisted with rage, his eyes bloodshot. This is probably the first time Izuku has ever seen him lose a fight and he's clearly pissed about it. He ignores All Might's repeated warnings and takes a step towards Ieyasu and Uraraka. Izuku frowns. Kaken usually gets away with a lot, but this is unacceptable. Gently nudging his way past his classmates, Izuku promptly takes the mic from All Might and says sharply, Kaken. Kaken freezes. Izuku glares at his image on the screen. He hopes the other boy can somehow feel it. Kaken's fists clench and unclench repeatedly. He lifts his foot. Kaken. Izuku snaps again, an edge of warning in his voice. After grinding his teeth and glaring at the two girls for a solid minute, Kaken snarls and backs down. He huffily leans against the wall and crosses his arms, still glaring daggers at Ieyasu and Uraraka, who both glance at each other before continuing to move to the third floor. Satisfied, Izuku hands the mic back to All Might and turns around. His classmates stare at him with wide eyes. What? He asks innocently. There's a couple more seconds of silence in which All Might unsuccessfully tries to smother his laughter. Then, Kaminari speaks up. Dude, he breathes, his eyes wide with awe. That was. He didn't even listen to All Might. Izuku blinks, confused. You didn't even have to try and convince him. Sero gawks. All you had to do was say his name. Kaken? Asui tilts her head. You two must be very familiar. Izuku nods, still unnerved by their stares. Yeah, he says, scratching the back of his head. His classmates glance at each other and a few of them shudder. What? He asks again. Kirishima gives him a toothy smile and wraps an arm around his shoulders. That was supermanly, dude. He says, but damn, I'm almost scared to find out what you had to do to make a guy like that listen to you. Izuku's eyes widen and he waves his hands around frantically. Oh, no, it's not like that. He protests, we're just childhood friends. He doesn't even listen to me half the time anyway. I'm not like trust me, he kicks my butt all the time when we spar. Kirishima laughs and ruffles his hair. I like you Midoriya-kun. He grins. Oh hey, there goes Ida-kun. Izuku tries to politely duck out from under Kirishima's arm to look at the screen. Ida isn't faring well against both Ieyasu and Uraraka. He attempts to keep the weapon out of their grasp by picking it up and running around, but Ieyasu creates a grappling hook and binds his legs together, making him fall to the ground. Their victory is secured soon after. Hero team wins. All Might yells victoriously. Man, Yamimo is super cool. Ashido says, enthusiastically. Izuku smiles. Yamimo. What a cute nickname. Right? Another girl he thinks her name is Jiru says, her quirk is really cool. Uraraka-kun was pretty great too, Kaminari says, she sent Bukage-kun flying. It's too bad about her arms, though, Sero says, wincing, that burn looks painful. There's a pause, then all 14 students turn to Izuku expectantly. He blushes, and looks at his feet. Young Uraraka, All Might says into the mic, will you need assistance getting back to the monitor room? He presses a finger to his earpiece, then nods. Alright, then. Return promptly. To the rest of the class, he says, we'll review their performance together and then teams I and B will go. The students nod and Izuku smiles a bit. All Might is doing well for his first day as a teacher. The two teams enter the monitor room a few minutes later and Izuku immediately approaches Uraraka. She's holding her burned forearms close to her body, a pained grimace on her face. Izuku ignores Kaken's glower and instead focuses on Uraraka. Can I see your arms? He asks softly, holding out his hand. She nods and carefully stretches her forearms out. Izuku frowns down at the nasty burns marring her soft skin. They remind him of the burns on Haru. He instinctively reaches out to use his quirk, but then he hesitates. This isn't like the usual scrapes and bruises he's used to healing. If he could just use his quirk all the time, then Recovery Girl probably wouldn't care whether or not he knew first aid. Pausing, he looks over the burns for a few moments. Now he notices that bits of Uraraka's costume have been seared into her skin. If he healed her, would the fabric get trapped beneath her skin? He doesn't want to find out. Thankfully, the black gloves that are a part of his costume are covering his hands already. He doesn't want his quirk to activate as soon as he touches her. Not with the pieces of fabric that have been seared into her skin. He'll have to cut it away first. He quickly finds some scissors and tweezers in his pouch and starts carefully removing the cloth. Sorry about your suit, he apologizes as he cuts around the burn, but Uraraka simply smiles and shakes her head. Don't worry about it, she says, wincing when he pulls another piece out. As soon as her burns are clear of any scorched fabric, he pulls off his gloves and gently puts his hands on her forearms, letting his energy flow. Uraraka watches in awe as the burns fade away right before her eyes. Whoa, she whispers. Dude, that's awesome. Izuku jumps in surprise and glances around. He didn't realize that all of his classmates were watching him. It just disappeared in like 5 seconds. Kirishima exclaims. Tokoyami gives him an impressed look. That's some quirk. How'd you do that, man? Kaminari asks. Oh. Izuku fidgets nervously, not knowing who to look at. My quirk is called Healing Energy. It's like, I heal people by transferring my own energy to them. It, makes me really tired if I use it too much, though. He laughs sheepishly. Your own energy? Ida asks, peering down at him curiously. I've never heard of a healing quirk that works like that. Oh, yeah, I guess it's kind of uncommon? It sounds more like a question. Ashido bounces up to him and grins, her black eyes wide. What's the biggest injury you've ever healed? Izuku swallows and looks to All Might for help. The number one hero just grins and shrugs. Well, he supposes it's alright if he's vague about it. I regrew a guy's stomach once, he admits. The reaction is immediate. Hoa. But I passed out for like 2 days afterwards. He adds quickly. Whoa. Yerazu puts a hand on her chin in thought. I suppose a quirk like that would carry more risks for you, she says. It must be a very self-sacrificing power. Izuku blinks. Oh. I guess so. All Might claps his hands, catching everyone's attention before they can continue questioning Izuku. Well, then. He says, let's discuss their performance. Who do you think the MVP is? His classmates mutter amongst themselves, but Izuku thinks it's rather obvious. He glances at Yerazu, who looks torn between raising her hand and staying quiet. She probably doesn't want to seem conceited. Smiling, Izuku raises his hand. All Might nods to him. Yes, young Midoriya. I believe Yerazu-kun is the MVP of this exercise, he says. All Might's grin widens even further. And why is that? Time for Izuku's hero analysis skills to kick in. Yerazu-kun embraced this challenge. She thought of ways not only to apply her own quirk in battle, but her teammates as well. While sending Bakugo-kun to play the offensive role was a good idea on the villain team's part, It was obvious that they didn't communicate well with each other. It looked more like Bakugo-kun was going off on his own. Ida-kun did well to protect the weapon, but he took advantage of the fact that this was training. If the weapon had been real, carrying it around while fleeing from heroes would not be a viable option. Uraraka-kun worked well with her partner, but she relied a bit too much on Yaozu-kun. Yaozu-kun was fully prepared to engage with her opponents. She had a strategy and never lost sight of the mission. When he finishes, everyone is staring at him again. Yaozu's cheeks are tinged pink. Even All Might looks surprised. Izuku blushes. I like analysis. He mumbles sheepishly, scuffling his toe. Correct. All Might suddenly shouts, making everyone jump. Good observation, young Midoriya. Now, let's move on to the next match. Tackle this training after thinking about what we just talked about. As the next two teams leave, Izuku goes over to Kaken, who is sulking against the far wall. Hey, he asks, you alright? Kaken grinds his teeth. Fucking superb. Izuku frowns. No, you're not. Your face is all scowly. You're upset about the training match. Kaken wordlessly snarls. Izuku remains unfazed. Leaning against the wall beside his friend, he says, don't feel too bad about it. It's just training, that's all. You can't always expect to win. That's bullshit, Kaken hisses lowly, I always win. No matter what. The best hero always comes out on top. Izuku gazes at him for a long moment. Kaken's pride has been hurt, no doubt, but there's something he's clearly not understanding. Kaken, Izuku says, quietly, you're not the best here. The blonde's head whips up to glare at him. Izuku glares right back. You're not the best here. You're used to beating up people that are weaker than you, that don't have aspirations to be a hero. But guess what? Now you're surrounded by people just like you, people with strong quirks, people that all want to be the best hero. You're on even ground with everyone, now. So no, you can't always expect to win. Before, you were the strongest because you just happened to be born with a powerful quirk. But now, you're going to have to work to be the strongest. Got it? Kaken stares at him, his eyes slightly wide. Then, he grits his teeth and turns away sharply, burning holes into the ground with his glare. Izuku sighs. I don't really know what I'm doing, either, you know? He says, I thought I could just rely on my quirk for everything, but I can't. There's a lot of stuff I don't know yet and it is frustrating, but I'm willing to learn. Are you? Of course I fucking am. Kaken snaps a little too loudly. A couple of classmates glance back at him from the group. Izuku smiles. Good. He looks back at the screens, which show Team I and B getting ready in the battle building. Match 2. All Might announces a couple of minutes later, Team B will be our heroes. And Team I will be the villains. Look alive, kids. Show us you're the embodiment of good. He falters. Or evil. Let's go. Izuku smothers a snort behind his hand. All Might is doing pretty good for his first day as a teacher, but he's incredibly goofy at times. It's even funnier to know that his classmates probably think it's on purpose. As soon as the buzzer sounds, Shoji steps into the building and spreads his multiple arms, listening for his opponents. Izuku thinks back to what Recovery Girl told him about quirk overuse. He supposes that would only apply to emitter-type quirks, but he wonders what would happen if one of Shoji's extra limbs were cut off. Would it grow back? If not, would he still be able to replicate different body parts on whatever is left? He should ask when he gets back. After Shoji reports to Todoroki, he goes back outside. Murmurs of confusion ripple through the students. Izuku watches in awe as Todoroki places his right hand on the wall and freezes the entire building. Unfortunately, it also makes the monitor room very cold. Under normal circumstances, his classmates might gape at Todoroki's power. However, now they're just too busy shivering. Izuku steps closer to Kaken, who thankfully tends to run warm. He did not cause any damage to his teammate or the nuclear weapon, All Might says, his teeth chattering, and on top of that, he weakened the enemy. Hagakure and Ojiro appear to be stuck, their feet frozen to the ground. Izuku feels a brief flash of concern over potential frostbite, but Todoroki uses his left hand to both claim the weapon and unfreeze the building. Hero team wins. All Might declares. Todoroki's face remains impassive as he turns and leaves the building. Wow! Sato exclaims. Kamenari looks impressed, but a bit uneasy. Man, what's up with that quirk? As expected of someone who got in through recommendations, Asui comments. Izuku tilts his head, watching Todoroki through the screen. From the recommendation exam, he knew Todoroki's ice quirk was powerful, but this is a whole other level. His left side probably prevents him from getting frostbite, while his right probably prevents him from overheating. But why does he keep his left side frozen? Wouldn't that make it hard for him to use his fire, as well as reduce his mobility? As soon as the teams return, Hagakure bounces over to him. Can you use your quirk on me? She asks excitedly, I wanna see it again. Also, my feet hurt. It's probably not that bad, Ojiro says, approaching more calmly, but takes off his shoes anyway when Izuku gestures for him to do so. It's just some frost nip, so he uses his quirk. He can't see Hagakure's feet, but he assumes they look the same as Ojiro's. They thank him once he's done and he looks up at Todoroki, who's standing a bit away from the group, gazing up at All Might impassively as he reviews their performance. Once the teams for the next match leave, Izuku approaches him. Todoroki-kun. He says, I was just wondering why do you keep your left side frozen? Todoroki narrows his eyes and Izuku immediately backpedals. I mean, I was just worried about frostbite. He stammers, flailing his hands, even though your left side would keep you warm, which, by the way, why doesn't that just melt the ice? Wouldn't keeping your left side frozen reduce your mobility? And make it hard for you to use your fire? And I don't get frostbite, Todoroki interrupts, his voice monotone. Oh. Izuku squeaks, averting his gaze out of sheer embarrassment. Right, that's good. He notices that Todoroki didn't answer any of his other questions and looks like he has no intention to. Still, Izuku gets the feeling that he shouldn't ask. Your friend looks upset. Todoroki's face doesn't change, but his eyes slide past Izuku. The greenette glances over his shoulder to see Kaken glaring daggers at Todoroki. He lets out a shaky sigh of relief. An angry Kaken he can deal with. A cold, emotionless Todoroki, however? He has no idea how to deal with that. Right. Thanks, I mean, I'll see you later? Izuku turns away before he can see Todoroki's reaction, his face burning as he scampers back over to Kaken. What did that fucker want? His friend growls. Izuku just covers his face with his hands and not so subtly tries to hide behind Kaken. Nothing, he groans, I'm just awkward. The rest of the matches go on with relative ease. Izuku soon forgets his embarrassment and watches the screens with rapt attention, trying to learn as much as he can about his classmates' quirks. There aren't any more injuries for him to heal, although Aoyama tearfully asks him if he's able to heal his cape that Ashido accidentally burns. The class takes up most of their afternoon, so all there's left to do afterwards is change out of their costumes and return to homeroom. He's already thinking about his lesson with Recovery Girl as he walks back to the classroom. A few of the other students are enthusiastically discussing the training, but Izuku doesn't pay much mind to them. At least, not until the final bell rings and Ashido stops him from grabbing his bag. Midori-kun. She grins. Don't leave just yet. Eh? He asks in confusion, slightly unnerved by her gaze. I can call you Midori-kun, right? She asks, I have a feeling we're gonna be great friends. Oh, I'm Kirishima Jiru. Kirishima seemingly pops up, out of nowhere. We're all going over the training right now. I'm Saruhanta, I'm Aoyama I'm Ashido Mina. I'm Sato. I know. He stammers, I heard. During the training. From All Might? He rapidly loses confidence as he continues to talk. Thankfully, his classmates don't seem to mind his awkwardness. I've never met a healer before. Ashido says, it's super cool that you get to be in the same class as us. Are you ever going to join a training lesson? Kaminari asks, but Sero punches him in the shoulder lightly. No, silly. He's a healer. Healers don't fight. Actually, I do, he says, trying to keep his voice steady. I've been taking self-defense classes since I was 10. Somehow Ashido's eyes sparkle even more. You know martial arts? She squeals and Izuku nods. So cool. I love martial arts. Where do you train? Her intense energy makes Izuku struggle to find his words. Oh, why do you need to know how to fight? Sero tilts his head. So you are going to be training with us? Kaminari asks. Yes, but not on days when we're supposed to use our quirks for direct combat. Izuku manages to stammer, I'll stay on the sidelines for that. To Sero, he says, healers need to know how to fight because they're sometimes put in dangerous situations, especially for combat medics. Combat medics? Sato asks. Izuku nods. Yeah, like if they join a rescue team, or sometimes I think they follow heroes when they fight big battles and are on standby for injuries, but they're technically out on an active battlefield then, so wow. Kirishima exclaims, I've never thought about all this stuff. I just figured healers stayed in the hero agencies or something. Do you? They all turn to see Kaken glaring at them, having just put his costume back in its case slot. He stomps over to them huffily. Quit hounding him, idiots. He snaps, shouldering his way to Izuku. He doesn't have time to answer your shitty questions. He grabs Izuku's arm and pulls, but Izuku protests. Wait, yes I do. Kaken stops and glares at him. Don't you have a lesson with Recovery Girl or something? He sneers. You have after-school lessons too? Kaminari gives him a pitiful look. Yikes, that's rough. At the mention of Recovery Girl, Izuku perks up. Yeah, I do. Which reminds me. He turns away from Kaken and says, one of the things she told me to find out today was how my classmates' quirks affect them when they're overused. His classmates brighten. My brain short-circuits and I get really dumb for a while, Kaminari says, looking way too proud. My acid starts to eat away at my skin. My hardness gets hard to keep up after a while. I get really sleepy after I use my quirk. Oh, and the sugar also makes me kind of dumb. My stomach hurts if I shoot my laser, for more than a second. Aoyama winks. So it's a good thing you can grow me a new one if my stomach ever collapses. The mental image makes the conversation falter for a moment, everyone just staring at the sparkly boy in shock and mild disgust. Then, Kaken grumbles, I'm pretty sure I saw round face puke her guts out after the entrance exam. Izuku frowns. Round face. Hey! Your Araka snaps, from across the room. Ida suddenly starts shouting at a boy named Tokayami for sitting on one of the desks, which grabs all of their attention for a few moments. Kaken tugs at Izuku's wrist again. Right, well, I do actually have to go, he says apologetically. No worries. Kirishima says. Asui's head pops out from behind him. If you would like, Midoriya-chan, we can go around writing down how our quirks affect us and give it to you tomorrow, Ribbit. Izuku protests, not wanting to trouble them all, but they take to the idea eagerly. Don't worry about it, Midoriya-kun. Anything to help out our class healer. It'll help us get to know each other better, too. He thanks everybody profusely as Kaken drags him out of the classroom, huffing in annoyance. They don't talk much as they walk to the infirmary, Izuku still reeling from the interaction. When he opens the door, he's surprised to see that Recovery Girl isn't alone. A boy with smooth blonde hair is sitting on the bed, complaining quite loudly about the pain he's in. Recovery girl looks mildly annoyed. Kaken takes one glance at the scene before turning away with a snort. Have fun with that, Izuku. Izuku sighs as he walks away and steps into the infirmary. Ah, Midoriya-kun, perfect timing, Recovery girl says as soon as she notices him. Come on over. Who are you? The blonde boy asks, seeming unimpressed. Midoriya Izuku, he replies, glancing between the boy and his mentor. Are you alright? Apparently, one of his classmates chopped him on the head, Recovery girl says, her tone dry. Izuku's lip twitches. Kendo-kun doesn't understand a joke when she hears one, the boy gripes. Recovery girl stifles a sigh and looks at him. Basically, he has a headache. How would you heal him? Surprised, Izuku hesitantly replies, with my quirk. No, just ice it and give him a couple of painkillers, she says bluntly. Now that you're in the hero course, you're going to be dealing with injuries bigger than scrapes and bruises. You should learn how to spend your energy wisely and don't use your quirk unnecessarily, especially on minor injuries that will typically go away in a day. Izuku thinks back to the burns on Uraraka's arms. Usually minor injuries aren't too taxing on him, but if he heals a lot of them they eventually take a toll. If he had to heal Uraraka's injury after healing a bunch of minor ones, he imagines he'd be very tired afterwards. He nods. Okay, that makes sense. Recovery girl looks at him expectantly and he jumps, quickly going over to the mini fridge and taking out an ice pack. As he presses it to the blonde boy's head, he asks, "What's your name?" "Monomento," the boy replies, eyeing him up and down. "Are you a nurse or something?" Amused, Izuku says, "I'm a healer. Or, well, I'm going to be. Recovery girl-san is training me to become one." "She said you were in the hero course." "Yeah, I'm in class 1A, he explains. "I'll join some of their hero lessons, but whenever they involve direct combat with quirks I'll be on the sidelines in case anyone gets hurt." Monoma's face twists into something indecipherable. "You're in class 1A? How come they get a healer and we don't? Huh?" Izuku looks at him in confusion. "I'm in class 1B, Monoma says. "How come 1A's getting special treatment?" "Oh, no, they're not. I just..." Recovery girl interrupts him by slapping something into Monoma's hand. "Go to the water fountain outside and take these," she says. "You can keep the ice pack." Monoma blinks down at the pills in his hand. Recovery girl ushers him out of the infirmary soon after and turns to Izuku with a huff. "I'll tell you something, Midoriya-kun," she says. "There are two types of heroes you'll encounter. Those that try to act tough and hide their injuries, and those that complain non-stop about every little thing." She sounds so annoyed that Izuku can't help but laugh. "Oh, come on, he didn't seem that bad," he teases. His mentor huffs, again before asking how his day went. He tells her about the combat training and how cool his costume is. He also describes with detail how he got the fabric out of Uraraka's burn before he healed her. She looks impressed. "I'm glad I didn't have to teach you that myself. I'm sure by now you've realized why I'm having you learn traditional methods first." He nods and she gestures to one of the beds. "Your quirk is powerful, Midoriya-kun, but all quirks have limitations. What would happen if you healed a broken bone without taking an X-ray first?" He gets the feeling that she already knows how he'll respond, but he still says, "It might heal wrong. I mean, if it's a bad enough break that I'll need to set it first." Recovery girl nods and smiles. "And I'll teach you how to do all of that, how to take an X-ray, how to set a bone. I'm glad that you had the foresight to remove the fabric from that young lady's burn before healing it. Wounds that are dealt with incorrectly often result in surgery being needed." Izuku suddenly becomes nervous. Will I need to learn how to do surgery too? He doesn't know if he can handle that much gore. Even Uraraka's burn was hard to look at. Recovery girl notices his discomfort. "Don't worry, I'll definitely be saving that for later. No way will I be teaching a first year how to operate on a human being." Izuku lets out a sigh of relief and his mentor beckons him closer, grabbing a chart from her desk. She takes him through the list of students that she treated today, which isn't many since it's only the second day of school. She asks him how he would have treated them before telling him how she did. It kind of feels like a pop quiz, but she doesn't get upset when he says something incorrect. He's grateful for her patience and afterwards he tells her about his classmates' quirks. He tries to remember what he can about what a few of them told him about how their quirks affect them, but eventually he just reassures her that they'll write down that information later. "Don't worry about it," Recovery Girl says. "Geez, you like to rush, don't you? Trust me when I say that you've already done more than I expected you to. It's not bad to be an overachiever, but I don't want you to get so worked up over thinking that you haven't done enough." Izuku takes a deep breath and nods. He can't help wanting to learn as much as he can as soon as he can. It's hard to take things slow. He wants to be a healer already. He wants to fix All Might's injury. Recovery Girl gets his attention again. "Now, how about you tell me how you think you treat each of your classmates' quirk overuse?" For the first time in his life, Katsuki lost a fight. The foreign yet distinctly recognizable feeling of failure that he hasn't felt in a long while returns, now, and it only fuels the burning rage within his chest. He glares heatedly at the ground, slouching against the wall as he sulks in the hallway outside of the infirmary. His blood boils with anger and humiliation as he recalls the shit show that was their first hero lesson. He can't believe he had been taken down so easily. No, taken down isn't even the right word. It was hardly even a fight in the first place. If it was, he would have turned both of those bitches into mincemeat. He was going to, but they got him first, and he was about to say fuck it and blow their asses up anyway, just to wipe the triumphant look off their faces and make sure they damn well knew this didn't mean they won. But then Zuka called out to him with that tone and Katsuki begrudgingly backed off solely because Zuku sounded like he was going to get his panties in a bunch if he didn't, and Katsuki didn't want to deal with that. But damn, those bitches. Especially that ponytail chick, she nearly fucking blinded him. He had been expecting her to have some tricks up her sleeve. After all, she'd gotten a better score than him during Aizawa's quirk assessment test, and Zuka mentioned that she was one of the other students that got in through recommendation, so surely she must have some level of skill. And she sure as hell proved it. What the fuck was her quirk? Some sort of object creation quirk? Where the hell did she get that shield and those flash grenades from? Whatever, it doesn't matter. He underestimated her. He underestimated that round-faced chick too. He'd caught a glimpse of her puking her guts out earlier during the entrance exam and immediately dismissed her as weak, instead seizing up Ponytail as the bigger threat and deciding to focus on going after her. But then Roundface surprised him by appearing out of nowhere and sending him flying into a fucking wall. And it's not just them, either. He'd underestimated all of his other classmates too. When he'd seen that half-and-half guy freeze the entire building, it felt like his own blood had been frozen as well. All he could do was stare at the screen in awe as the guy single-handedly defeated his two opponents, something he failed to do in mere seconds. This was Todoroki Shadow. Katsuki recognized him, of course. This was the son of Endeavor, the son of the number 2 hero. A recommendation student, just like Ponytail Girl. And just like her, he already scored higher than Katsuki during the quirk assessment test. This was his competition. This was the real deal. Faced with such blatant, immense power, Katsuki had been momentarily stunned to find that he couldn't see himself defeating someone like him. The blonde clenches his jaw. His heartbeat flutters like a bird's wing in his chest as he ducks his head, squeezing his eyes shut. Damn it. Damn it. No. This is the real deal. Us, the best of the best. That's what Zuka was trying to tell him, wasn't it? To not feel bad about it, because he can't always expect to win now that he's up against people that are strong too. Right? Katsuki swallows heavily. Zuku. What must he think of him? To see Katsuki, the one who's supposed to protect him, to keep him safe, lose a fight. In all their lives, he's never seen him lose. What must be going through his mind? Surprise? A flicker of doubt? Is he thinking, perhaps, maybe he's not good enough then? Katsuki chases away the thought with a wordless snarl, but it's followed by another thought. A memory, the one of watching all of their classmates' matches, feeling the hard knot in his chest growing by the second, then glancing over to see Izuku's awestruck expression, eyes sparkling in obvious excitement at the sight of such powerful quirks. Recognizing that look. He knows that look. He knows that look, because even to this day Izuku still holds a healthy admiration for his quirk, because he knows damn well how great it is and he can always make those eyes twinkle by doing something particularly flashy, but now those eyes are turning elsewhere. Katsuki's fists curl. A brief flash of fear brushes against his heart beating rapidly within the cage of his chest. He grits his teeth. Fuck that. Fuck that. As the best of the best? Well then he'll be better than the best. He made the mistake of allowing himself to get too comfortable around the weak-ass losers in his junior high, but there's no time to fuck around anymore. He's in it now, All Might's goddamn alma mater. Izuku may have been right about him being surrounded by people with strong quirks, but he was dead wrong about them being on even ground with him. He's going to kick ass during training, show all these extras just how strong he is. Then he'll leave this place and everyone in his dust and become the greatest hero anyone's ever seen. And he'll be the best damn hero for Izuku. The only one worthy enough to protect him. The familiar burn of determination returns, filling his chest and overshadowing the unwelcome feelings of fear and failure. Katsuki straightens up, taking a deep breath through his nose as he clenches and unclenches his fists. There. That's better. Anger and determination, this he can deal with. The door to the infirmary suddenly slides open, making him flinch. He glances over in surprise, but it's not Izuku. Of course it's not, it's far too early, his lesson just began only 20 minutes ago. Instead a girl walks out, an upperclassman. Katsuki thinks he might have seen her walk in earlier. She doesn't have a scratch on her now, and she looks a lot happier than she did before. Of course she does. She just saw Izuku. Katsuki can hear the muffled sound of his bright voice from inside the infirmary, followed by familiar, bubbly laugh just before the door slides shut again. The fear flicks at his heart again. Katsuki swallows, throat impossibly dry. Clenching his jaw, he turns back to his phone with a scowl and pushes all thoughts of the day's events out of his mind, stubbornly ignoring the lingering hint of fear in his chest that refuses to be snuffed out. Izuku leaves the infirmary a lot later than he did yesterday. Even though he didn't do much healing today, he's still pretty tired after the long, exciting day he had. He finds Kaken sitting against the wall in the hallway, playing on his phone while he waits. Why didn't you go back to the classroom? Izuku asks as they walk to the train station. You could have chatted with our classmates instead of just being bored in the hallway. I wasn't bored, Kaken grumbles, but says nothing else. Izuku glances at his friend, frowning slightly. The explosive blonde almost looks like he's pouting as he trudges onward, his brows furrowed and his eyes on the ground. He must still be upset about losing to Yaozu and Uraraka. However, Izuku already gave him a talk and he's kind of too tired to think of another one. So instead he just sighs and leans his head against Kaken's shoulder while they wait for their train to arrive. Kaken glances at him, but stays quiet. He doesn't say a word the entire way home, and as more time passes Izuku starts to get a bit concerned. Kaken isn't usually one to keep his thoughts to himself. He's not exactly the quiet type. Before he steps onto his porch, Izuku opens his mouth to speak, but instead Kaken interrupts him by saying, "If you ask if I'm alright, I'm gonna kick your ass." Izuku knows he doesn't really mean it, but he snaps his mouth shut anyways. He and Kaken watch each other for a long moment before the latter huffs. With a determined gleam in his eyes, Kaken straightens up and declares, "I'm just getting started, you hear? I don't give a shit about what happened today, I'm still gonna become the #1 hero. So you better keep your eyes on me. His words are unabashedly confident, like he doesn't have an ounce of doubt in his body that is his future, no matter what anyone else has to say about it, and Izuku doesn't expect anything less from him. He's so blatantly brash and arrogant, and after his behavior in today's hero lesson Izuku should really be more chastising, but still he finds himself smiling. He nods. I'll look forward to it. Chapter 10. The next day, as surrounded, Izuku and Kaken stare out at the crowd of reporters swarming around the entrance of the school, shoving a microphone into the face of every student that tries to enter. I guess they heard that All Might is teaching here, Izuku says uncertainly. Kaken just lets out a very annoyed huff. He doesn't make a move, but his eyes are roaming over the mob, analyzing and searching for weaknesses. Izuku shifts uneasily. So, how are we gonna? Kaken suddenly grabs him by the arm and starts dragging him toward the crowd. A reporter notices them and immediately shoves a microphone at them. She demands, how are All Might's classes? Get the fuck out of my way. Kaken roars. It's startling enough for the reporter to jump backwards in surprise. Kaken proceeds to bulldoze his way through the mass of people, loudly snapping at anyone who tries to shove a camera in his face. Izuku, for once, is actually grateful to be dragged behind his friend. They make it through the crowd fairly quickly and Izuku is only a couple of minutes late for his meeting with Recovery Girl. TSK. His mentor rolls her eyes. I don't know how Toshinori-kun deals with those vultures all the time. Has he said anything to you? Izuku shakes his head. No, not today. He texted me after I went home yesterday, but that was mostly just to ask what I thought of his teaching. And what did you think of his teaching? He ponders about it for a moment, trying to find the right words. I think he has a lot that he can teach us, but he smiles and shrugs. He's All Might, you know? Recovery Girl huffs and turns to her desk, saying, well, you don't have to worry about him today. You don't have a hero lesson but you have, which, Aizawa-kun will be teaching. And before you ask, yes, you will be participating. Izuku closes his mouth. It'll be a quirkless sparring lesson, so you'll get a chance to show what you learned in that self-defense class you mentioned. Izuku perks up. Finally, something he can join in on. His morning classes seem to take forever today. In the past few months, he hasn't gone to as many self-defense classes as he had before, mostly because he's just been so busy studying for the recommendation test or schoolwork or Recovery Girl. And now that he's completely dropped out of Kimura's class, 1, because he simply won't have any time to attend her after-school lessons on top of Recovery Girls, and 2, because he'll be learning even more about fighting in So, it's been a while since he's had a good sparring session. He's excited to train with his classmates, but part of him is worried that perhaps he's gotten a bit rusty. He doesn't want to embarrass himself. He wants to show that he's strong even though he doesn't have a combative quirk. Quit fucking muttering, Izuku. Kaken growls. Izuku snaps out of his thoughts and smiles apologetically. They're on their way to the cafeteria for lunch, although he thinks he might be too nervous to eat. Kaken gives him a look. You've been acting all weird and fidgety since you checked in with Recovery Girl. Is it something about one of our lessons later? He frowns. We don't have any hero classes, just... What's so bad about... Izuku wrings his hands. You know I can't say, Kaken, he sighs. As a Recovery Girl's apprentice, he's privy to information that other students don't know, whether it be about each other or their future classes. Just things that he needs to be aware of, like All Might's injury or certain students' allergies or a lesson that he needs to be prepared for in advance. But he can't just go telling that information to anyone who asks. Katsuki grumbles under his breath and Izuku hastens to reassure him. It's nothing bad, though. You know me, I get nervous about everything. His friend snorts and thankfully drops it. He leads the way into the cafeteria and while they're waiting in line for food, Izuku glances around. For the past couple of days, he and Kaken have been eating lunch by themselves, either finding an empty table or sitting with some upperclassmen that ignore them. But now that they're more familiar with their classmates, Izuku wants to go sit with them. He spots Ida and Uraraka sitting at a table together and starts walking over to them once he gets his food. As soon as Kaken realizes where they're heading, he immediately stops and scowls. Hell no! Izuku sighs and Kaken starts roughly nudging him away with his shoulder. Kaken. I'm not sitting with 4 eyes, the blonde growls. And I sure as hell am not going to eat with round face. He's annoying as fuck and she fucking threw me into a wall. Well, technically your explosions did that. Kaken glares daggers at him and he swallows. But alright, fine, we won't sit with Ida-kun and Uraraka-kun. He glances around the cafeteria and spots Todoroki and Ieyasu sitting at a table in the corner. He perks up. What about Todoroki-kun and Ieyasu-kun? Kaken raises an eyebrow, clearly not remembering their names, and turns to follow his gaze. His scowl deepens. Bitch nearly blinded me. Izuku rolls his eyes and you act weird around fucking Ishot. No, I don't, Izuku says, then recalls that awkward moment with Todoroki yesterday and sighs. Fine, how about Kirishima-kun? He spots the red-haired boy, sitting with Kaminari, Ashido, and Sero. Kaken pauses and huffs, shitty hair. Izuku's patience is about to snap, but then the blonde shrugs. Fine, whatever. Izuku blinks in surprise. Fine, whatever? Wow, Kaken must really like Kirishima. When did they become friends? How did he not notice? Kaken scowls at his stunned silence. Well, are we gonna sit with them or what? Izuku nods, rapidly and leads the way. Kirishima grins at him when they approach. Hi, guys. Do you mind if Kaken and I join you? Of course, man, no problem. Izuku makes sure that Kaken ends up sitting next to Kirishima while he takes a seat next to Ashido. This is the first time that Kaken has actually seemed to want to hang out with a particular person other than him, and Izuku is going to foster this new friendship as best as he can. Hey, Midoriya-kun, Kirishima says, handing him a piece of paper. We got that list that we were talking about yesterday. Izuku looks down at the paper and to his delight he sees information about his classmate's quirks drawbacks, written down in various handwriting. He reads what is no doubt Ieyasu's neat handwriting and nearly smacks himself in the face. Of course she's susceptible to malnourishment. She can't create things out of nothing, but it's so cool that she can transform the molecular structure of her fat. He'll be sure to keep some extra nutritional bars in his medical pouch. In fact, as his eyes roam over the list, he realizes he can add a lot of things to his bag to help out his classmates. Some sugary candies for Sato, some anti-nausea pills for Uraraka. Maybe he can find something that'll help strengthen the lining of Aoyama's stomach. He'll have to ask Recovery Girl later. Looking back up at Kirishima, he grins. Thanks, Kirishima-kun. Kirishima flashes him a toothy grin and scratches the back of his head. No problem. It was actually kind of cool getting to hear about everyone's quirks. Hey, we helped too, Ashido pouts and Kaminari nods. Amused, Izuku smiles and thanks them too. Ashido immediately blushes and waves him off while Kaminari lifts his chin proudly and drawls, it's no big deal. Kaken snaps his chopsticks in half. Lunch with the three of them is very entertaining, much more so that sitting alone with Kaken is. Izuku spends so much time laughing at Kaminari's antics that his food is cold by the time he remembers to eat. Even Kaken is amused, although he hides it underneath gruff annoyance. Finally, after lunch if over, it's time for their class. Aizawa tells them nothing except to change into their training uniforms and meet him in Gym Gamma. If Izuku's classmates notice his obvious excitement, they don't mention it. Gym Gamma is a huge and spacious building. When they walk inside, they see numerous blue mats rolled out across the floor. Aizawa stands in front of them with his usual blank yet judgmental expression. "We're going to be doing sparring lessons today," he says. Everyone starts to cheer, but then he adds, "without your quirks." Wait, what? Aizawa blinks slowly, somehow looking very tired despite the fact that they haven't even started yet. "Before you can learn how to fight properly with your quirks," he says, "you're gonna need to become good at fighting without them. Most of you guys have emitter-type quirks. Now imagine if you came across a villain with a quirk like mine." A few students shudder. Your quirk can only take you so far, and relying heavily on it will only hold you back. What you need is to build a solid foundation before you can start applying your quirk to your battle skills. Some of his classmates seem a bit miffed that they don't get to use their quirks, but Aizawa's explanation is logical enough to appease most of them. He has them separate into two groups, those who claim to have experience in hand-to-hand combat and those who have none. Kaken and Izuku, of course, go to the experienced group. Todoroki and Ieyasu join them too, along with Ashido, Kirishima, Ida, and to Izuku's mild surprise Ojiro. "Alright," Aizawa says, "you're gonna split off into random pairs and begin sparring. This is just so I can evaluate your skill levels and see where each of you is at, so there's no need to use excessive force." He sends a pointed look at Kaken, who huffs. "You'll fight for about 20 minutes, or however long it takes for me to assess all of you. Afterwards, I'll spend the rest of the class demonstrating real fighting moves." Kaken moves to partner up with Izuku, but apparently Aizawa is the one that's going to decide who their partners are. Kaken ends up getting paired with Kirishima, Ieyasu with Ashido, Ida with Ojiro, and Izuku with Todoroki. The bicolored boy turns his cold gaze at him and Izuku's sweat drops. Well, shit. As the groups disperse into pairs, he hears someone whisper behind him, "Geez, isn't it a little unfair to pair up the strongest in the class with the healer? I know, right? Hopefully, he'll go easy on him." The voices sound like they belong to Kaminari and Sero, but that hardly matters. Izuku's mind freezes. They're underestimating him. Kaken keeps casting him sharp glances as Kirishima leads him away and Todoroki falls into a fighting stance that definitely looks a bit lax, and oh my god, they are totally underestimating him. Indignance pricks at his heart. A very Kaken-sounding voice in the back of his head snarls, "Well, fuck that." Aizawa tells them to start, but Izuku doesn't move. Instead, he remains, in the stance that Kimura taught him, muscle memory coming back to him despite his recent lack of training. He watches Todoroki, who eyes him up and down, realizing that Izuku won't be making the first move. Izuku takes a deep breath, keeping alert for any signs of an oncoming attack, and Todoroki steps with his right foot before he punches. It's a common hint, one of the first things that Kimura taught him to keep an eye out for. A proper stance is the foundation of a strong attack, so you can anticipate a person's movements by watching their feet. And Izuku knows the perfect counter-attack. While Todoroki swings with his left arm, Izuku ducks under his fist and darts forward, aiming a punch at the boy's ribs as he steps past him. It takes Todoroki by surprise, but when he tries to turn and face Izuku again, he jams his elbow into Todoroki's temple. Hard. Probably harder than he should have, but he doesn't give himself time to feel bad. As soon as Todoroki stumbles from the blow, Izuku grabs his wrist, aims a kick at the back of his knees, and pins him to the ground with his arm twisted behind his back. It's a quick takedown, probably not taking more than 10 seconds. Silence fills the gym. Izuku keeps his attention on Todoroki beneath him, watching him for any signs of movement. So when someone bursts out in loud, obnoxious laughter, it startles him. Head whipping up, he instantly flushes when he realizes that everyone is staring at him with wide eyes. Well, everyone except for Kaken, who is too busy laughing his ass off next to Kirishima. Dude. Did he just? Holy fuck. Kaminari exclaims. Even Aizawa seems mildly surprised, although he glares at Kaminari for cussing. Meanwhile, Ieyasu gives him an impressed look and Ashido flashes him a grin. Izuku's face turns red under the attention. Below him comes Todoroki's muffled voice, "Can I get up now?" "Right." Izuku squeaks, jumping off of him. Todoroki peels himself off the mat and Izuku winces at the red mark on his cheek from being pressed against it. "Sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hit you so hard." There's a bruise blooming on the other boy's temple and shit. Now Izuku feels really bad. "It's fine," Todoroki grunts, steadying himself. Aizawa sighs and calls out, "Good job, Midoriya. But please try to avoid giving your partner a concussion. That goes for all of you." He briefly fixes the other students with a hard look. Before he turns away, he says, "And Todoroki." The boy glances up and Aizawa smirks slightly. "Don't underestimate your opponent based on their quirk." Izuku can't help it, he smiles and ducks his head. Todoroki looks a bit disgruntled but nods. "All right, back to work, brats." Izuku turns back to Todoroki and they both fall into fighting stances. In the corner of his eye, he sees Kaken finally compose himself and face Kirishima, but he still has a grin on his face. Izuku focuses on Todoroki when he moves to attack. And damn, Todoroki's fighting for real now. Not that Izuku's upset that he's finally being taken seriously, but after the third time in a row he gets knocked on his ass, he starts to feel just a smidge of regret. Todoroki is an extremely skilled fighter. His movements indicate experience, and he's got the muscle to back up his attacks. Fighting him would be fun if it wasn't also painful. Even so, he can't tell that the other boy is pulling his punches. Not exactly holding back, just putting less power than he could behind his blows, probably so he doesn't seriously hurt Izuku since this is training. After the fifth time he's beaten, Izuku starts to give Todoroki a run for his money. His fighting style is so different from Kaken's that it throws him off a bit at first, but once he gets used to it, the fights start lasting longer. He still loses the majority of them, which is frustrating, but at least he doesn't go down too easily. It's always worth it to see the look on Todoroki's face whenever he manages to land a hit or a kick on the other boy. Whenever he's not laser-focused on his partner, he takes note of his other classmates' sparring sessions. Ashido is faring surprisingly well against Ieyasu, and Ida and Ojiro seem to be evenly matched too. He noticed Kaken getting knocked down by Kirishima during the first few rounds, but that's probably because he was trying to simultaneously keep an eye on Izuku. Now he's doing much better against Kirishima, but the wins are a solid 60-40 in his favor, so the redhead isn't doing too bad himself. Izuku pays for his distraction by getting his feet swiped from under him. Time passes and as they continue to spar, Izuku starts to notice one of his own weaknesses. Usually, sparring in Kimura's class doesn't last too long. They'll go a few rounds, then take a break or switch partners. But they've been at this consistently for nearly 20 minutes now and Izuku's stamina is rapidly draining. He's panting heavily, his clothes are drenched in sweat, and his curls are starting to escape from his ponytail. For what feels like the 100th time, Izuku gets knocked to the ground, but, for some reason, Todoroki doesn't just let gravity do the work like he usually does. The next thing Izuku knows, there's hands on his wrists and a heavy weight pinning him down and holy shit, Todoroki's face is really close now. Todoroki stares down at him with narrowed eyes. His skin is flushed and he's panting slightly, but his gaze is unwavering. His heterochromatic eyes are gazing down at him with such intensity that it makes Izuku's breath catch. A flush creeps up his neck as he stares back, up at Todoroki with wide eyes. Izuku feels like a butterfly pinned to a board, wings spread for the other to see. His heart threatens to beat out of his chest as he wiggles his hands experimentally, but it's clear Todoroki has no inclination to allow him any kind of movement. The grip on his wrists is like iron. Izuku gulps. Todoroki may be cold, but his eyes burn. For a few tense moments, they stare at each other. Both panting, both high on adrenaline. Todoroki's bangs fall into his face as he looks down at him. Izuku has no idea what the hell is going on. But something in Todoroki's eyes slowly turns curious. He probably wouldn't even notice it if he wasn't so close to the other boy's face. Finally, Todoroki speaks. Not bad. His voice is low. Who trained you? Izuku can barely form a coherent thought right now. Todoroki's intense eyes practically erase his ability to think. Huh? Comes his intelligent reply. Todoroki stares at him for another moment. The grip on his wrists flexes. He opens his mouth. All right, everyone, that's enough. Aizawa's voice cuts through the tension like a knife. Todoroki blinks and looks up at Aizawa as he tells everybody where to gather for his demonstration. As soon as the other boy's gaze is off of him, Izuku lets out a huge sigh of relief. He almost feels dizzy. He asks weakly, can I get up now? Todoroki looks back down at him and seems to just realize that he's still pinning him down. Oh. He gets off. Sorry. Izuku clambers to his feet, ignoring how his legs suddenly feel shaky. Todoroki stands back and watches him, carefully. Laughing breathlessly, Izuku says, "You're a really good fighter, Todoroki-kun." He hardly reacts. "Thanks," he says, then asks again, "Who trained you?" Huh? Izuku blinks, recalling Todoroki's previous question. "Oh, I took self-defense classes with a woman named Kimura Aki. Since I was 10, but I stopped recently." It doesn't seem to be the answer Todoroki was looking for. But after a moment the other boy nods and turns to join their classmates, who are gathering in a group in front of Aizawa. Izuku hastens to walk by his side. "Who trained you?" he asks, hoping to strike up a conversation. Todoroki's eyes narrow and he suddenly becomes nervous. Did he say something wrong? Is it a touchy subject or? He almost thinks Todoroki won't respond, but eventually the other boy huffs, "My father." His father. Izuku's mind flashes back to the tall, intimidating man covered in his own flames. Of course Endeavor would be the one to train Todoroki. He's the son of the number 2 hero, why would he need to train with anyone else? But the way Todoroki just replied, he didn't sound very proud. If Izuku didn't know any better, he'd say his tone was almost resentful. Maybe they don't get along too well? He can't imagine training with a man as terrifying as Endeavor would be very fun. They reach the group quickly and Izuku sits down next to Kaken. He hears Todoroki sit down close by. As Aizawa starts demonstrating some basic forms for the less experienced students, Izuku has trouble focusing. There's something nagging at the edge of his mind, something he can't quite grasp. He feels Kaken watching him out of the corner of his eye. "You alright?" his friend asks in a low tone. "Did that icy hot fucker rough you up too much?" "No." Izuku trails off, glancing to his right. Todoroki is sitting a couple of feet away from him, watching Aizawa with a blank gaze. His left side is facing Izuku. Green eyes land on a blotchy red scar. For some reason, Izuku feels his stomach sink. "Izuku?" Kaken questions. "Nothing," he murmurs, turning away from Todoroki. He doesn't meet his friend's gaze. "I'm just awkward." Later that night, Izuku goes on the computer and researches everything he can about burn scars. There's even more press at the entrance of the next day. Kaken grits his teeth and Izuku sighs tiredly. He stayed up a bit too late last night, with homework and reading for Recovery Girl and that thing about Todoroki's scar. Ever since their sparring session, he's just had a lot on his mind. No solid ideas or theories or anything, just his mind overreacting as usual. It also doesn't help that he's still sore from yesterday. Recovery Girl offered to heal his bruises during their lesson but he politely declined. It's been a while since he's felt the ache of a good spar. No need to worry about some sore muscle, sure, it'll prevent him from using his quirk, but he's focusing on traditional healing methods anyway. Still, he's not too inclined to take on a crowd of reporters again when he's not feeling 100%. "Alright, bitches," Kaken growls, cracking his knuckles, "time for round 2. He grabs Izuku again and starts shrieking at the reporters as he enters the mob, but it's a lot harder this time. There's twice as many people and cameras than yesterday, and everyone seems to be even more determined to interview students. Izuku is finding it hard to follow Kaken despite the fact that he's practically being dragged along. Suddenly, a hand clasps around his wrist and yanks him back. Yelping, he stumbles, and Kaken's hand loses its grip on his arm. "Hey!" The blonde snaps, whirling around, but as soon as they're separated, the crowd of reporters swarms around them. Izuku. "Hey, fuck off. Get Kaken?" Unable to see his friend amongst the mass of people, Izuku starts to panic. Whoever grabbed him still has an iron grip on his wrist. He tries to pull away using one of the wrist escapes that Kimura taught him, but as soon as the grip is broken, more hands grab onto him. "Let me go. Let me go. Kaken. You." A microphone is shoved in his face. "Give us a statement. Tell us about All Might." Izuku glances around frantically. There's flashing lights and cameras no matter where he turns. He feels suffocated by the crowd of people pressing down on all sides. The hands on his wrist tighten and yank again. Ow. He grimaces, trying once more to pull away. "Please, let me go. I have to go to class." To his disbelief, the reporters sound angry. "Just a statement, kid. Come on, you gotta give us something. What is the symbol of peace like as a teacher? Tell us." Over the droning of the crowd, he hears Kaken screech, "Get the fuck away before I blow your asses up." Shit, he's getting angry. He's been doing so well, not getting into any fights, but if he uses his quirk on civilians then he'll definitely get in trouble. "Kaken. I'm alright." Izuku calls out, tugging his wrist again. "I'm fine, it's okay, I just have to let go of him." A cold voice suddenly cuts through the commotion. Izuku nearly cries with relief when he sees Todoroki approach him, the crowd partying for him slightly as he walks. One of the reporters grabbing Izuku perks up at the sight of the son of the number 2 hero, but a sharp look from him has her faltering. Todoroki's eyes land on the hands gripping Izuku's wrist. The air around him seems to drop 10 degrees, and Izuku isn't the only one that notices. "You know," Todoroki says lowly, coming to stand in front of Izuku while keeping his gaze on the offending reporters. "Most people wouldn't dare lay a hand on a healer." His eyes narrow dangerously. Heroes tend to be protective of them. There are 3 people grabbing onto Izuku's wrist. 2 of them stiffen in alarm and instantly pull away, but the woman instead perks up. "Eh? A healer?" Her eyes flash hungrily. "As a new healer?" Her co-worker looks nervous. Sasaki-san." At least he seems to realize the implications of Todoroki's words. Now that there's only one person holding on to Izuku, he's able to break her hold fairly easily. He immediately pulls back and ducks behind Todoroki, rubbing his wrist gingerly. Kaken's voice roars again. "Izuku. I'm fine." Izuku calls back. Todoroki looks at him, and then at the reporters. "We're leaving now," he says, his tone leaving no room for argument. Izuku stays close behind Todoroki as they make their way out of the mob, keeping his arms close to himself in case someone tries to grab him again. As they weave through the crowd, Izuku glances up at Todoroki's face. The other boy isn't looking at him. His scar draws Izuku's attention, reminding him of his research the previous night. He'd spent almost an hour looking at various pictures of different types of burn scars, so he knows now that Todoroki's scar must be from water rather than fire. Which is relieving. After the way he sounded talking about being trained by his father, which really wasn't more than a couple of words, Izuku couldn't help but wonder if his scar had been caused by Endeavor. Which would absolutely be none of his business. Even if his father had been the cause, he just has an overactive imagination. Kaken is already at his gates when Izuku and Todoroki escape the crowd. His eyes widen and he rushes over. "Izuku. Damn it, are you alright?" Izuku starts to reassure him, but then the blonde's eyes land on his bruising wrist. What the fuck? Who fucking did that? I'll kill them. Kaken, it's fine, he says, a couple of reporters grabbed me, but Todoroki-kun made them leave me alone. He turns and smiles at said boy, who is standing a bit away, watching them silently. Kaken glares at him for a moment before clenching his jaw. Thanks, I guess, he mutters begrudgingly. Todoroki blinks, looking as aloof as usual. No problem. His eyes slide to the reporters, who are standing just behind the gate. The press is annoying. You can say that again, Izuku huffs. How come they listened to you and not me? Todoroki shrugs. Well, anyway, Kaken sniffs, class is starting soon. You still gonna check in with Recovery Girl? Izuku looks down at his phone and winces at the numerous texts from his mentor. He should go see her, even if it's just for a couple of minutes. He bids his goodbyes to Kaken and Todoroki, the former not wanting to go with him in case he gets late, and rushes over to the infirmary. Sorry, Recovery Girl-san. He apologizes as soon as he bursts into the room. Midoriya-kun. Recovery Girl turns to him with a confused expression. What kept you? I was beginning to get worried. He scratches the back of his head sheepishly and waves her off. Ah, it was nothing. Just had a bit of trouble getting past the press, that's all. She frowns, but when she spots the angry red bruise forming on his wrist, her eyes widen. Did they do that to you? Huh? He glances at his wrist. Oh, yeah, but it's alright. Doesn't hurt that bad. Recovery Girl's expression doesn't ease. She holds out her hand and Izuku gives her his wrist, sighing in relief when she kisses it gently. As grateful as he is, he can't help but tease. I thought you were all against using your quirk for minor injuries? Your quirk, she corrects. My quirk doesn't rely on sacrificing my own energy. She turns back to her desk, but something about her tone seems troubled. He hesitates. Maybe he can't afford to have bruises today? Will I need to use my quirk in class today? He asks, but Recovery Girl shakes her head. No, that's not it, she says. You kids are just going to be doing more sparring lessons with All Might this afternoon. Aizawa-kun should have told you that yesterday. Izuku nods. She huffs. What bothers me is the press. And the fact that they're getting physical with students. Geez, so desperate to talk to Toshinori-kun that they'd resort to hurting children. She sniffs. Izuku gives her a gentle smile. I don't think that they meant it. Still, I'll talk to the teachers later about keeping those vultures away. His mentor glances up at the clock before telling him to hurry off to class. Izuku races down the hallway and steps into his homeroom right as the bell rings. Aizawa spares him a single glance but doesn't comment as he rushes to his desk, panting heavily. Good job during yesterday, he grunts. You'll be practicing the moves I showed you during your hero class today with All Might, and then he'll talk about how you can apply your quirks to those moves. Murmurs of excitement ripple through the class and the teacher narrows his eyes. I said he'd talk about it. You won't get to spar with your quirks until you learn the basics of fighting. The excitement dies down a bit. Aizawa sniffs. Now, let's get down to homeroom business. Sorry about the late notice, but today I'll have you. Everyone tenses up. Decide on a class representative. Izuku lets out a sigh of relief. Finally, a normal school activity. The classroom erupts into shouts. I wanna be class rep. Pick me. Me too. I want to do it too. I'll be the leader. Izuku stays quiet, watching with amusement as his classmates argue over who should be the class representative. Their enthusiasm makes sense. In a normal class, they'd probably just be taking on everyday tasks. But in a hero course, being class rep would allow someone to practice being a top hero by leading a group. It's a good opportunity for the future heroes. He chuckles when Kaken aggressively demands to be the one to take on the role. Ida is quick to calm down the chaos and suggests that they hold an election to choose the class representative. Most of his classmates probably vote for themselves, but Izuku isn't quite sure who to vote for. As much as he loves his friend, Kaken isn't exactly the most level-headed person. Then again, taking on a leadership role could have the effect of making him more mature, but that isn't a guarantee. Izuku glances around the room and spots Kirishima. He seems to be pretty friendly with everyone, but he's not as goofy or careless as Kaminari and Ashido. Not that Izuku really knows him too well, but if he's able to somewhat wrangle Kaken, then he should be able to deal with whatever this class throws at him. So, Izuku casts his vote for Kirishima and nearly faints in shock when he gets chosen to be the class representative. What? Me? He squeaks, I got votes? Kaken is confused too. Huh? Izuku? Who voted for him? Well, it's better than voting for you, Sero teases lightly and the blonde snarls at him. As the two bicker back and forth, although it's mostly one-sided on Kaken's part, Izuku is still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. He got 3 votes. 3. He got more than Ieyasu and damn, he didn't even think about voting for her. She would be so perfect for the role. But, why me? He stammers, I mean, I'm not even going to be a hero, really, I'm just a healer. Maybe it's not such a bad idea, then? Kaminari suggests. Kirishima grins. Yeah, you're pretty cool, Midoriya-kun. Yeah, remember when he healed Uraraka-kun? He seems pretty friendly with everyone, I guess. Yeah, Midoriya-kun. Wait. Izuku waves his hands frantically. I'm flattered and all, but I'm really not much of a leader. Don't sell yourself short, Midoriya-kun, Ieyasu says, catching everyone's attention. As a healer, you have a unique role in this class. Even though we may be classmates, every student in the hero course are rivals to some degree. Everyone except you. Izuku gapes at her and she smiles. You are neutral party. So if you are our class representative, then we know you won't be biased in any way. Izuku blinks. Then blinks some more. Oh. His voice is tiny. I guess that makes sense. Ieyasu nods. It's logical. She glances at the rest of the class. Sero turns away with an airy huff. Well, we know who you voted for then. He simply grins when Ieyasu frowns at him and says, alright, I'm down. Yeah, me too, Kirishima agrees, grinning at Izuku. Good luck, class rep. The boy hesitates. He's still not so sure about this. But everyone seems to agree with Ierasu's logic and soon Aizawa announces him as class president and Ieyasu as vice president. Izuku gulps nervously. Quit worrying, Izuku, Kaken growls as they sit down for lunch. It's not the end of the world. Sero nudges Izuku and says, hey, even Rikugu-kun agrees. Well, it's better than having any of you fucking losers do it. Kaken snaps, stabbing his food more harshly than necessary. One of his chopsticks snaps at the end. Sero and Kaminari immediately burst into laughter while Kaken screeches at them. Izuku sighs. Next to him, Ashido puffs up her cheeks in a pout. He has a point, though. Izuku looks at her in surprise and she tilts her head. You're really the best one for it. Ieyasu-kun is so smart. She lets out a wistful sigh at the end. But I thought you guys wanted to be class rep, he protests, glancing between her and Kirishima. You seemed so excited about it. Kirishima shrugs. Well, yeah, it seemed like a good idea at first. But then when we were writing down our votes, I thought maybe not? Yeah, too much responsibility for the first year, Kaminari complains good-naturedly, leaning against Sero. So I figured I'd vote for you, Kirishima says, startling Izuku. I mean, if you can get Bakugo-kun under control just by saying his name. He laughs when Kaken screeches at him. Then handling the rest of us should be a piece of cake. I didn't vote for you, I still voted for myself, Kaminari admits sheepishly. scratching the back of his head, "but I'm glad things turned out the way they did now." "Yeah, you'll do great, Midori-kun," Ashido says. Kirishima and Kaminari grin while Sero gives him a thumbs up. "Oh." Izuku blushes a little bit, tucking a curl behind his ear as he smiles down at his food. It's kind of heartwarming to know that his classmates think so highly of him after only knowing him for a short amount of time. "Thanks, guys. I'll try and do my best, then." Sero grins. "Don't worry about it. Although, I think Ida-kun might be a bit broken-hearted." He points at another table with his chopsticks, where Ida is, currently spluttering at something Uraraka said. Izuku shrivels. Ida had seemed really enthusiastic about being class rep. "Oh, God, I didn't even think I should go apologize or something." Ashido waves him off before he can work himself up too much. It's his own fault, anyways. Yeah, he's the one who talked up the whole election thing, even though he knew most of us would vote for ourselves, Kaminari says, and then he didn't vote for himself. What did he think would happen? They all glance back at Ida, who is now standing with his chest proudly puffed. Uraraka beams at whatever he's saying, but Kaminari, Kirishima, Sero, and Ashido just squint in confusion and slight judgment. Kaken raises an eyebrow. Izuku tilts his head. He wonders what Ida is saying to Uraraka to make her look so amazed. Before he can say anything, alarms suddenly blare loudly. Izuku flinches and Ashido lets out a little lip of surprise. A voice says over the speaker system, "There has been a level 3 security breach. All students please evacuate outdoors promptly." I repeat, level 3 security? Sero asks, "What's that?" "I dunno, but I think it's pretty serious." Kaminari turns, in his seat, looking at some older students as they jump up and start running out of the cafeteria. Others soon follow, seeming scared and panicked. Kaken stands up. If it's a security breach, then that probably means someone's trespassing on school grounds. He gives Izuku a sharp look. "Let's go." They all abandon their food and hastily make their way out of the cafeteria. However, since everyone else is doing the same, the hallways quickly get overcrowded. With so many people packed together, topped with the fact that they're all panicking, it soon becomes a stampede. And for the second time that day, Izuku loses Kaken in the crowd. "Don't push." "Hey! What's happening? Stop it. Ow." Izuku quickly turns at the sound of the cry, but there's no point in trying to figure out who it came from. Everybody is pushing and shoving against each other as they try to reach the end of the hallway. Izuku yelps as someone steps on his foot and jerks back, only to bump into another student. "Hey, wait. I'm falling. Crap. People are going to get seriously hurt with everyone stampeding like this." Izuku grimaces and tries to help a stumbling boy regain his balance, but it's hard when he barely has any balance of his own. "Everyone," he yells, "please, calm down. You are going to get hurt." His voice gets drowned out by the shouts of dozens of students. He can just barely hear the sound of Kaken calling his name, but there's no way he can find him in this mess. All he can do is wait for things to calm down and try to avoid getting injured in the meantime. As soon as he thinks this, an elbow comes flying towards his face. He tries to dodge, but with such little space he still ends up getting hit on the cheek. "Ow!" he cries out. Then a foot kicks him in the shin, causing him to stumble. A hand suddenly grasps his upper arm and yanks him backwards. He feels his back collide against someone's chest and struggles to glance over his shoulder. "Don't worry, Midoriya-kun," Kirishima shouts, "I've got you." He proceeds to harden his arms and holds them beside Izuku, protecting his upper torso and face from getting hit. "Kirishima-kun. Thank you." Izuku breathes a sigh of relief. With movement being so difficult, he can't even twist around to properly see the redhead, but it doesn't matter. Kirishima stays close, chest pressed against his back as he protects Izuku as best as he can with his arms. The greenet's feet still get stepped on every other second, But at least he doesn't have to worry about getting a broken nose on top of it. This is crazy. Kirishima shouts, painfully close to Izuku's ear. He suddenly pauses and plunges one of his arms into the crowd. A moment later, he fishes out Kaminari. Oh, hey guys. The electric boy perks up. This is crazy. That's what I just said. Kirishima replies, grunting when someone elbows him in the ribs. Another person cries out in pain and Izuku winces. People are getting hurt. He yelps. Kaminari raises his arms and yells, everyone, stop. Slow down. Slow do. He promptly gets knocked off his feet, but Izuku grabs him by the jacket before he can get swept away. He pulls the other boy close. Things are getting more and more uncomfortable by the minute, with Kirishima pressed against his back and Kaminari pressed against his front. They're roughly jostled by the crowd with every step they take, and Izuku is really starting to freak out now with just the seemingly endless amount of people around him. He's about 2 seconds away from a panic attack when everything suddenly stops. Something has caught everyone's attention, making them stop and look up. Izuku peeks over Kaminari's shoulder, surprised to see Ida standing on top of the emergency exit sign. Everyone. Everything is fine. Ida shouts. His legs wobble slightly and Izuku's heart leaps to his throat in fear. Still, Ida continues, it's just the media. There is nothing to panic about. Everything is fine. This is let us act in a way befitting the best of the best. His tone is so chastising that it actually makes some students pause. A few glance around and someone calls out, oh, wow, it really is just the media. The police are here too. Oh good. Slowly but surely the pressure surrounding Izuku eases away as people calm down. He lets out a huge sigh of relief and beams up at Ida. The blue-haired boy is still standing confidently on top of the emergency exit sign and Izuku can't help but think that he looks really cool. As for the cause of the stampede. Man, I really hate the media now, he grumbles and Kirishima laughs. Thanks for protecting me back there. Are you alright? The redhead waves him off. Yeah, I'm fine, don't worry about me. But, he looks over Izuku's shoulder and the boy turns around, following his gaze to a couple of students making their way out of the hall. One has their arm around the other's shoulder and is clearly limping. Glancing around, Izuku sees that there are a lot of people with minor injuries. Oh. He winces, turning back to Kirishima and Kaminari. I should go help out Recovery Girl-san. If you see Kaken, can you, Izuku? Never mind, he cuts himself off, trying to give Kaken a reassuring smile as the blonde rushes over to him. I'm fine, Kaken, it's alright. I have to go to Recovery Girl-san now though. Kaken doesn't look mollified. I'll walk you there, he says, taking a step forward. But Izuku shakes his head. It's fine, there's already gonna be a bunch of people there anyway. Before he turns away, he glances up at the emergency exit sign and asks, can you make sure Ida-kun gets down safely? Kaken grumbles in response but Kirishima and Kaminari give him a thumbs up. Satisfied, Izuku turns and starts running to the infirmary as fast as possible. By the time he gets there, there's already a long line of students waiting outside. Sorry, excuse me, he mumbles as he pushes his way into the room. When Recovery Girl sees him, she almost looks like she's about to cry in relief. Midoriya-kun, she exclaims, thank goodness. What is going on? What's this about a stampede I'm hearing? Izuku's already moving to his desk to grab some latex gloves, pausing to quickly put his hair up in a hasty bun in order to get his curls out of the way before he puts them on. Everyone freaked out when the alarm sounded and we were told there was a security breach, so everyone started rushing outside, but we got stuck in the hallway cause it was too small for all of us, so, yeah, stampede, but it was just the media that sounded the alarm. Recovery Girl lets out a noise of frustration and turns back to the student she's treating. Dear Lord, what a mess. Can you go outside and start examining everyone? Those with more serious Injuries can be treated now, but if they just have scrapes and bruises then tell them to come back after school. Izuku nods dutifully and walks outside. Everyone, he calls out, facing the line of students, I'm going to check your injuries, but if you have minor injuries that can wait, then please come back after school. There are too many people to take care of right now. The students stare at him in confusion. And who are you? An upperclassman asks with a raised eyebrow. I'm Recovery Girl San's apprentice, he replies, already moving towards her to check her for injuries. Where are you hurt? Recovery Girl San has an apprentice? The girl asks instead of answering. Izuku's fairly stressed out right now, so he doesn't feel too bad about giving her a harsh look. She straightens up. Oh, shit, alright. I got elbowed in the ribs pretty hard. She has no qualms about lifting her shirt to show him her ribcage. A couple of guys behind her suddenly seem very interested, but Izuku sends them a sharp glare and they avert their eyes innocently. He turns back to the girl's torso, poking and prodding gently while asking her some questions. The gloves keep him from automatically healing her as soon as he touches her skin, which would be bad if any of her ribs were broken. However, he soon determines that they're most likely just bruised and tells her to come back later. She seems a bit disheartened, but leaves. As he turns to the next student, he notices that a few other people are leaving as well, probably deciding that their injuries are minor enough to wait. A couple more students leave when the lunch bell rings, but worrying about being late to class is the last thing on Izuku's mind right now. He is surprised to come across Aoyama amongst the remaining students, however. He doesn't know the other boy too well, but it's clear that Aoyama is being unusually quiet right now. The blonde is cradling his hand to his chest with a pained expression. Monsieur, he whimpers, I fell in the hallway and my hand got stepped on many times. He holds his injured hand out and Izuku can immediately tell that it's broken, maybe even in multiple places. The skin is turning purple and his fingers are swelling heavily. It's the worst injury that Izuku has seen so far. You fell? He carefully starts leading Aoyama towards the door, ignoring a student that complains about the blonde getting to skip the line. Did you get hurt anywhere else? Aoyama sniffles. Someone kicked me in the head and another person stepped on my back before I was able to stand up again, but my hand hurts the most. Okay, we'll get you fixed up soon, Aoyama-kun, Izuku reassures, then looks up as they approach his mentor, who is frowning down at a girl's leg. Recovery Girl San, I checked out most of the students and managed to convince some to come back later. The rest mostly just have sprains or cuts, but I'm pretty sure Aoyama-kun here broke his hand. Recovery Girl takes one look at the boy's hand and concludes the same thing. The poor woman seems so overwhelmed right now, strands of her hair are even starting to come out of her bun from all her rushing around, but she's quick to usher Aoyama outside. I'll need to do an X-ray, I'm sorry, but do you mind taking over here for a few minutes, Midoriya-kun? She looks extremely apologetic. I'm fairly certain Hyakun's ankle is just sprained, so it's fine if you just use your quirk. But remember to limit yourself. I don't want to come back in here to find you exhausted, alright? Izuku nods and she turns to leave, only to jerk back once more. Oh. And you, how are you? Any injuries? Izuku blinks and examines himself. He'd been so busy worrying about everyone else's injuries that he didn't even notice his own bruises, although they aren't that bad. It's just a couple of bruises, he says. Of course, it would still prevent him from using his quirk, and his mentor knows this too. She's expressed her reluctance to use her own quirk on Izuku before, given that it would sap the stamina that he needs to heal other people. However, since it is only a couple of bruises, she holds her hand out expectantly and kisses Izuku's knuckles when he gives her his hand. Then, she's bustling out the door with Aoyama in tow, and Izuku, hardly feeling any more tired than before, turns to the girl she had been treating earlier. Okay, Hyakun, was it? He asks, already kneeling down and taking off his gloves. The girl, an upperclassman with short pinkish hair, nods and tilts her head. "Who are you?" she asks. "I'm Midoriya Izuku, Recovery Girl San's apprentice," he replies, placing his hands on her ankle and letting his energy flow. She visibly brightens a few moments later and rolls her ankle, carefully, smiling when she feels no pain. "Wow!" she exclaims, "I don't even feel tired." "Thanks, Midoriya-san." She hops off the bed and bows politely before leaving. Izuku barely has time to process the fact that she called him Midoriya-san before the boy that was waiting after her approaches him. I got a cut on my arm," he says stiffly, lifting his arm to reveal a 6-inch long gash, running along the side of his forearm. Izuku's eyes widen. "Holy crap, how'd you get this?" He immediately takes the boy's arm into his hands. I think I grazed it against some kid with spikes during the stuff." The boy rails off as the gash disappears within seconds. "Oh." He blinks in surprise. "Cool. Next." Izuku calls. The boy takes the hint and leaves. The next few minutes are spent, treating patient after patient, each coming in with some sort of not minor but not life-threatening injury. He doesn't use his quirk for all of them, but he's still relieved when Recovery Girl returns with Aoyama. The blonde's hand is fractured in multiple places, but none of the bones completely broke, so thankfully he doesn't need surgery. Izuku keeps helping out other patients while also trying to pay attention to his mentor as she takes the opportunity to show him how to properly cast a hand. She doesn't want to heal him entirely since he still has class to attend, so she only half uses her quirk before sending Aoyama back to class with a late slip. Izuku envies her ability to control the output of her quirk. Once Aoyama has been taken care of, Recovery Girl is able to take over the infirmary again. However, Izuku still stays to help out until all of the students have been treated. By the time he makes it to his afternoon hero lesson, he's almost 40 minutes late. Recovery Girl gave him a slip, of course, but he also had to run to homeroom to grab his uniform, then run to the Gamma Gym changing room and quickly get dressed, then run into the gym. That, on top of the fact that he's been on his feet constantly since the stampede, plus using his quirk on numerous people, plus having not been able to completely finish eating lunch, means that when he finally stumbles into the gym, he's pretty exhausted. Everyone is in the middle of practicing sparring moves with All Might, but they all pause to look at him when he enters. All Might tells them to keep going, turning to Izuku with concerned eyes when he walks up to him panting. "Sorry I'm late," he gasps for breath. Recovery Girl San needed help healing people. Lot of injuries. He wearily hands his teacher the late slip. All Might takes it reluctantly. "I heard about what happened during lunch," he says. "I'm sorry that the media caused such a ruckus. Is everyone alright?" Young Aoyama came in late with a broken hand. He nods at said boy, who is sitting on a nearby bench watching his classmates spar, obviously not participating due to his injury. "Yeah, we dealt with most of the bad injuries," Izuku says. "We asked people with minor injuries to come by after school." He takes a deep breath and straightens up, trying to focus his scrambled mind. "So, what did I miss?" "Oh, I was just having them practice the moves Aizawa-sensei taught you guys yesterday," All Might explains, gazing at the sparring students. "In a few minutes, I'll stop everyone and start talking about using their quirks in fighting." He gives him a wary smile. "My first real lecture, I suppose." "Right." Izuku nods. Normally he might smile back at the obviously anxious teacher, but he's finding it hard to focus when his mind is still coming down from what happened during lunch. He feels like this is the first time he's actually stopped moving since the stampede. He starts to walk towards his classmates, intent on finding someone to pair up with, but a large hand on his shoulder stops him. "I think you should sit out of this one, young Midoriya," All Might says, his voice full of concern. "What?" Izuku asks. "Why? You look exhausted," All Might replies frankly. "Why don't you go sit with young Aoyama? We'll move on to the lecture soon." Izuku wants to protest, but the hero gives him a firm look and, well, he is pretty tired. So, he trudges over to the bench and sits down next to Aoyama with a heavy sigh. "Monsieur, are you alright?" Aoyama asks. "You look dreadful." Izuku snorts a little and says, "I'm fine, using my quirk a lot just makes me a bit tired." Aoyama nods in understanding and doesn't seem to mind when Izuku stays quiet after that, leaning his head against the wall and closing his eyes. His bun bothers him, but it's pretty messed up from the hectic day, so he just takes off the hair tie before relaxing again. He's hoping to rest for a little bit, but All Might stays true to his word and stops the sparring session a few minutes later, calling everyone to gather around him. Ignoring the numerous concerned glances sent his way, he joins his classmates as they sit down on the mat in front of All Might. He plops down next to Kaken and immediately leans his head on his friend's shoulder, sagging his weight against him tiredly. Kaken wraps an arm around his torso and Izuku lets out a sigh of relief. All Might starts going on a rant about applying quirks to fighting techniques and the importance of doing it safely. Izuku tries to pay attention, he really does. But he's been running on adrenaline for the better part of an hour and now everything's finally catching up to him. His muscles slowly start to go slack and his eyelids slip closed. He's not going to fall asleep, he tells himself. He just needs to rest for a couple of minutes. He falls asleep. Zuku. MHNNN. Zuku, come on, wake up. MMMHHHH. I'm not fucking carrying you all the way back to class, dumbass. I'll do it. Fuck off. MHHRR. Izuku drowsily blinks his eyes open, looking around. Nearly his entire class is gazing at him with various expressions of amusement. Yelping, he jerks into an upright position before his eyes land on All Might, standing behind his classmates. Horror fills his chest as realization dawns on him. Oh my god. Ashido-kuz, you're so cute when you're sleepy, Midori-kun. I fell asleep. He exclaims in dismay, jumping to his feet. All Might, I'm so sorry. That was so rude of me. He bows, apologizing profusely, but All Might just laughs. Don't worry about it, my boy. You looked like you needed it. He grins broadly. Class is over now, though, so I'm afraid you'll have to stay awake long enough to get back to homeroom. Maybe Aizawa-sensei will let you nap in his sleeping bag if you ask nicely enough. He laughs again and Izuku's face flushes a deep red. Kaken rolls his eyes and nudges him towards the door. Izuku shuffles along, hiding his face in embarrassment. As they walk back to the changing rooms, Kirishima comes up beside him and ruffles his hair gently. You sure you're alright, Midoriya-kun? I told you, it's just cause he used his quirk a lot, shitty hair, Kaken growls, pushing the redhead's hand away from Izuku. Oi. I'm alright, Kirishima-kun, Izuku says, and it's true. The nap gave him a bit of an energy boost and his mind feels much more clear than before, still doesn't make it okay that he fell asleep during class, though. Kaken keeps a careful eye on him throughout the rest of their afternoon classes, which are thankfully fairly calm. At their end of the day homeroom, Aizawa tells him and Ieyasu to decide on the rest of the class officers. They walk up to the podium and stand in silence for a moment, not quite knowing what to say. Izuku shifts, uncomfortably under the gazes of all his classmates before realizing what Ieyasu is looking at him expectantly. Oh. Right. He's the class representative. Izuku can't quite stifle the sigh that escapes him. All throughout his afternoon classes, he was really only thinking of all the students he has to treat after school. His day doesn't end once school does like the rest of his classmates, and, to add the responsibilities of being class rep on top of that, Izuku's exhausted just thinking about it. Before we decide on the class officers, can I say something? He asks. His classmates blink at him curiously. Ieyasu tilts her head as he turns to her and says, I think you should be the class president, Ieyasu-kun. Huh? She looks taken aback. Izuku looks at the rest of his, also surprised classmates and adds, And I think Ida-kun should be the vice president. He makes eye contact with Ida and smiles. The blue-haired boy just stares at him with wide eyes. Murmurs of surprise ripple through the class. Midoriya-kun, Yaozu says, baffled, but Izuku turns to her, giving her a reassuring look. I appreciate what you said about me earlier. He glances at his classmates ... and I really am flattered that you think I'd be a good class president. But I really don't think this role is for me. He nods at Ida and says, during lunch, Ida-kun was able to get everyone's attention in such a cool way. He stopped the stampede and prevented even more people from getting hurt. I thought he looked really heroic too, so I think it would be best for Ida-kun to lead you guys. He trails off, then jumps and waves his hands apologetically at Yaozu, of course, along with Yaozu-kun. She smiles but still looks uncertain. Midoriya-kun, if it's a matter of self-confidence, then it's not. Izuku shakes his head, then hesitates. Well, actually, it is, sort of. But it's mostly because I'm just really busy, you know? He laughs nervously, and scratches the back of his head. His classmates glance at each other in confusion. Clearing his throat, he continues, I mean, as a healer in training, I have a lot of responsibilities. Outside the hero course, I mean. Oh. Kaminari blinks. You mean like your after-school lessons with Recovery Girl-san? Huh? His classmates turn to him. He has lessons with Recovery Girl-san after school, Kaminari explains, you know, he's learning how to be a healer. Oh, wow, your Araka says, on top of what we're learning in here? Izuku nods. She suddenly has a very pitying look on her face, along with most of his other classmates. Oh, geez. I didn't even think about that. He did look really tired when he came back from the infirmary after lunch. Yeah, you've got enough on your plate already, man. Don't worry about it. We didn't mean to pressure you or anything. Izuku flails his limbs frantically, trying to reassure them all that it's okay, but Yaozu looks devastated. Oh, Midoriya-kun, I'm so sorry, she apologizes, putting a hand on his shoulder. I'm so ignorant, I didn't even think about it's alright, Yaozu-kun, really. He cuts her off, mentally hoping to get this over with as soon as possible. God, he's really not good with all this attention on him. Why does he have to make things so weird? He glances at Ida and asks, a hopeful tone in his voice, so, Ida-kun? Are you okay with being our vice pres? Ida still looks astonished, but after a few encouraging words from his classmates, specifically Kirishima, bless that boy, he accepts the role with a rather dramatic speech. As he marches up to stand beside Yaozu, Izuku sits down in his own seat with a sigh of relief. Later, when he goes to the infirmary for his lesson, he's surprised to see that Recovery Girl is not there. The numerous students with minor injuries, however, are. Izuku winces at the sight of the line already forming outside of the infirmary before deciding to go ahead and start without his mentor. Thankfully, since most of these students do have minor injuries, they're easy enough to treat. Izuku ends up raiding the cabinets for band-aids and disinfectants while instructing others to press ice packs to their bruises. He can't let them keep the packs like Recovery Girl did for Monomo. They'd run out by the end of the hour. The only time he decides to use his quirk is when a girl comes in with a heavily swollen black eye. Why didn't you stay during lunch? He scolds gently as he examines the dark bruise. The girl shrugs. It hardly hurts, so I figured it wasn't that big of a deal. Izuku stares at her incredulously. When you walked in you told me you could barely see anything out of it. She nods once, not quite looking like she understands. Is that bad? Izuku doesn't know whether to facepalm or sigh in exasperation. After a moment, he chooses the latter and grumbles under his breath as he heals her eye. Recovery Girl's earlier words come back to mind. There are two types of heroes you'll encounter. Those that try to act tough and hide their injuries, and those that complain non-stop about every little thing. He thinks he must have had his first encounter with the former. As he continues to treat students, he wonders where Recovery Girl is. His mentor hasn't sent him any text messages to explain her absence, nor did she leave any kind of note for him. When his last patient leaves, Izuku flops onto his desk chair and pulls out his phone. He's about to send her a message when a suddenly young Midoriya Izuku. A loud bang startles him enough to make him drop his phone. All Might! He exclaims as the #1 hero clutches his forehead, which had smacked against the doorframe when he tried to burst into the room. Are you alright? What are you doing here? All Might winces in pain and carefully ducks under the offending doorframe as he enters the room. I'm fine. He grimaces, swallowing some blood that threatens to escape his lips. Although sometimes I wish I wasn't so tall. Izuku's lip twitches as the man closes the door behind him and deflates into his normal form, still rubbing his forehead. Consider yourself lucky, he chides lightly, leading him to sit on the nearest bed. I'd love to be as tall as you. All Might snorts and Izuku reaches to heal his head, then hesitates. If he starts healing All Might, even if it's just for a bruise, there's no telling whether or not he'd be able to stop. Instead, he settles on just giving him an ice pack and a couple of gummies to cheer him up. Thanks, the hero says. Anyway, I just came here to check on you. Also, to tell you that Chio-san is coming soon, but she got caught up with something for the principal. There's something in his eyes as he says this that Izuku can't quite decipher. He almost seems not nervous, but more like bothered. Like he's got something on his mind, something that definitely wasn't there during class. Izuku tilts his head while All Might shifts warily under his gaze. The blonde forces a grin and asks, so, are you feeling better now? I saw some students walking out of the infirmary as I came by. Were you able to treat them successfully? Shrugging off the weird moment, Izuku nods and sits back down in his chair. Yeah, I could deal with them mostly without my quirk, although there was one girl that I wish would have come during lunch. I was able to heal her without too much trouble, though. And yes, I am feeling better, thank you for asking. Still tired from he makes a vague gesture with his hands, everything, but nothing a nice fat nap when I get home won't fix. All Might smiles. Crazy first week of school, huh? Oh yeah, definitely, Izuku huffs. I don't know why I expected things to be a bit more tame, at least at first. Welp, that's that for you. All Might lets out a long exhale and leans back, looking amused. I remember during my first week I ended up breaking my arm within the first couple of days. Izuku's expression must be comical because All Might bursts out laughing a moment later. Haha, yeah, Chio-san pretty much had the same reaction. Recovery Girl-san worked at when you were in the... Izuku asks with wide eyes. Oh yes, although she wasn't the full-time healer until much later in her life. She was a very busy young woman. All Might gestures to Izuku. She used to wear her hair down too, believe it or not. Izuku blinks and his hand subconsciously reaches up to his hair, which he didn't realize was still down. He usually keeps it up in a ponytail or a bun so it doesn't get in the way, but he let it down before his impromptu nap on Kaken's shoulder and he hadn't put it back up. But Recovery Girl with her hair down? Izuku can't even imagine it. All Might is still watching him with a small smile on his face. After a moment, he says, I don't think I've ever seen you with your hair down, young Midoriya. Oh, yeah. I guess I like to keep it up most of the time, he says. It's kind of hard to maintain otherwise. Drives my mom crazy. He chuckles, idly running his hands through his curls as he talks. He starts to pull it back into a bun, but All Might interrupts him. It looks good. Oh? Izuku blushes. Much better than mine does, All Might says, running a hand through his messy mane of hair. Izuku wonders how it looks so much more slick when the hero's in his muscle form. And the bangs, how do they stand up? Your hair looks fine, All Might, Izuku says, Do you ever put yours up? I've never been as adept at managing long hair as most people have. When Recovery Girl walks in a couple minutes later, it's to see Izuku kneeling on the bed behind All Might, threading deft fingers into his mane with his brows furrowed in concentration. He pulls most of his blonde locks into a small ponytail, leaving his long tufts of bangs free. All Might rubs the back of his neck, his fingers gently tugging the smaller strands that didn't make it into the ponytail, before his gaze lands on Recovery Girl. "How do I look?" he asks, a humorous twinkle in his blue eyes. The healer huffs and waddles over to her desk, slightly less rumpled than usual. "Now Shu, I have a lesson to teach." All Might bows politely and gives Izuku another grin before leaving. The boy turns to his mentor, who looks a little disheveled herself as she apologizes for being late. She doesn't give any explanation as to why, and he wants to ask her, but she's quick to turn the conversation to the students that they treated today. Like yesterday, they go over the list of patients that she logged down on her clipboard, and he instantly feels bad for not doing the same with the ones that he treated both during lunch and after school. But Recovery Girl reassures him that it's not his fault since he didn't know. She then teaches him how to fill in the necessary information in a clipboard of his own, plus she tells him that he is able to give late slips, although she strongly warns him against abusing that particular power. They talk about Aoyama's hand, and that eventually leads to her showing him how the X-ray machine works. It'll be a while before he's allowed to use such expensive medical equipment without supervision, but it's cool to learn about. By the time they're done, it's already 10 minutes past their usual ending time. "I didn't think we'd be getting to it so soon, but I'll show you how to properly put a cast on someone tomorrow," Recovery Girl says as he gathers his things, "you know, when there's not a bunch of injured teenagers to distract us." "Okay." Izuku zips up his bag and hesitates. Recovery Girl-san?" His mentor tilts her head. "When am I going to start training with my quirk? Not that these traditional methods are unimportant. I'm just curious." Recovery Girl sighs softly. "Well, I wanted to give you some time to settle in before we started any rigorous training, especially since your quirk makes you so tired. However, if this first week is anything to go by, it seems that going slow isn't going to fly very well. I'll think of some exercises you can do with your quirk next week." "Okay." He smiles, then fails to stifle a yawn. Today has been an incredibly long day. First he got swarmed by the media, then he got stuck in a stampede, then used his quirk multiple times to heal injuries for over half an hour, not to mention all the stuff with briefly becoming the class representative and everything that happened after school. Needless to say, he's feeling pretty drained. So, he bids his goodbyes to Recovery Girl and turns to leave. Before he makes it to the door, however, his mentor asks, "You walk home with one of your friends, right?" Bewildered, Izuku glances back at her in confusion. Her tone was nonchalant, but her expression is tight with worry. It's strange. She's never really asked about Kaken before. Yeah, I walk home with Kaken," he replies uncertainly. "You've met him before, right?" She nods but doesn't say anything else. He shifts his feet. Is that okay?" That seems to jerk her out of her thoughts, and her expression smooths slightly as she smiles. Of course, don't mind me." She trails off for a few moments and Izuku doesn't really expect her to say anything else, but then she looks back at him. "Just stick close to each other on your way home. Better to be safe than sorry." Izuku frowns in confusion. She's worried about his safety? "Oh, of course," he says. She nods and he leaves without another word. He finds Kaken waiting for him outside of the cafeteria munching on a couple of meat buns, although he passes one to the Greenet as they leave.